Hey everyone, I'm Brian Stabnick. I teach AP English Literature and Composition at Miller Place High School, which is on Long Island. And I'm going to follow up from Mr. Escobar. Now, he, just like I'm going to do, we're introducing fundamental concepts to English. I know he talked about character and setting and the events of a plot. I'm here to talk about point of view, specifically how a narrator tells a story. And as we get started, I want you to think critically about what point of view does, because I think it's one of those things that we've always taken for granted. We've always existed on the identification level, whether it's first person or third person. But the key thing from today's lesson, I want you to think about power, because I think the way a narrator tells a story gives that person power. But at the same time, here's what I want to be encouraging. I want you to think about the power that you have as a reader. I'm going to get to that idea a little bit later in this video, but first let's just focus on the narrator and the power that he or she has. What power do they have? A narrator's power, I believe, results from two things. One is their perspective, and that is how they see things, the events of a story. And the other is their position, whether it's intimately connected to the story because it's told from the first person where they are a character in the story, or if it's slightly removed and they're outside the story. And that's where we get third person point of view. So let's look at an example. And I want to take this abstract concept of point of view and give you something tangible so that you can understand it. So the power from the narrator comes from, as I just said, their perspective. And what I mean by that is how they tell the circumstances of a story is a form of control. And I think that's really important. So I want to use this image of a frame as our example. Here's where I'm going to try to make it concrete. I'm going to give you an example of my son who's only 9 years old. He just finished third grade. And I try to get stories out of him all the time, just about every day when he comes home from school. So I'll ask him about his school day and what happened. And he tries to frame a story for me that's small and limited. Much like you see here, there's a lot of white space. Because when I say, how was your day? What happened at school? He'll say, not much, which is a typical 9-year-old response. And in not giving me much, he's trying to control what I know about his school day. You may do the same thing. So your parents may ask you about a Saturday football game that you went to. And as you tell this story about what happened, there's going to be some things that you include in that story, such as who you were with, what time the game was. Was it a Friday night game or was it Saturday afternoon? You're probably going to include the sensations. Were you bored at a certain point in the second quarter and then you came alive in the third quarter when your team started to rally? You'll probably mention if it was home or away. Your parents might know that already, so you might leave that out. You'll certainly mention what was involved, like what you did before the game or at halftime or what you did after the game. And this may be the most important thing. You may talk about what it meant, especially if it was meaningful to you or if it was just something to do on a Saturday. And in including all these details, you're exercising control because you're having power over how this story is told. You're controlling what your parents know. The other way that the narrator can exercise power in a story is from their position. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and I said position could be the first person point of view or the third person point of view. So if we look at our frame again, the easy way to remember it, and this is probably going back to something that you've learned in middle school, with the first person point of view, the narrator is in the story. They are a character. So you're going to see words like I, me, and we. And this is something that I'll break down in the next video in greater detail, and you'll also be able to see it in context. The other way that a narrator can tell a story is if they're outside the story. And this is when they're not a character themselves, but it's almost like a reporter reporting on the events of a story distant from it. And that's why we get this idea that they're outside the story. They're not intimately involved in it. So what power does a reader have? I mentioned this earlier, and I wanted you to think about how you can exercise some control, that we don't have to submit everything to the narrator in terms of how a story is told. Well, if we go back to that frame and all those details I mentioned earlier about the football game and your parents have the power to question everything. And this is what I do with my son. I'm always asking him, what did he do in art? Who did he sit with at lunch? Who did he ride the bus home with? And in doing so, I'm trying to expand that frame and be critical of his day. Not critical where I'm trying to criticize, but I'm trying to get him to think deeper about the events that he shares with me. And I'm sure your parents do the same thing. Whether it's a football game or a school event or just hanging out with your friends, they want to know more. And I use this because this is the analogy of what good readers do all the time. They're asking questions of a story, and not just of the events. They're asking questions about how the story is told and who's telling it and what perspective they're telling it from. And that allows them to understand the story on a better level. So what should we take away in this video? Here are the two main ideas that I want you to keep with you. That there's going to be a relationship established between the narrator and reader, because the narrator controls how a story is told. And you may like this narrator, you may despise this narrator, but in a way, that's going to create some type of relationship. Maybe positive, it may be negative. But we don't have to submit all the power to a narrator. In a sense, when we focus on the perspective, the position that someone's taking, as well as how they see things, and we question those things, we can come up with a more critical understanding of the text and really see what's in that frame as well as what's outside that frame. Because if we think about storytelling, every story has limitations, and a narrator is going to show us what they see. And just like in this image here, there's a lot in that frame right there.